So here's where we left off last time. We have a simple HTML page using Twiiter Bootstrap. We have a left column, a right column, and a main content area. And what we're going to do this time is recreate our login form using Twiiter Bootstrap so it looks more professional. So the first thing we want to do is clear out the stuff we don't need in this template. So let's go back to our editor and let's delete the contents of the left column, but not the div that makes that column because we still want that to be there. The content of the center column, which is the H1 tag, the table, and that link that we created to Google, so that's gone. And let's delete the content of the right column. There, so if we save that and go back and reload the page, it should be blank. The only thing that I missed was that well, so let's get rid of that well class up here. Delete that, go back, reload the page, and it's blank. Great, so this is our starting point. Now what I want is a form with a place for a username, a place for a password, and a button to click on to let people log in. So if we go back to the Twiiter Bootstrap site, and I'm just on the Getting Started page where you go to download stuff, you'll notice at the top we have this link to CSS. And this gives us some excellent documentation on how to use the CSS components of Twiiter Bootstrap. So I'm going to click on that, and you notice over here on the right hand side there's an entry for forms. Well, that sounds like it's exactly what I want, so let's have a look at it. I click on that and we jump way down, and the format for the documentation is really simple. They tell me what I'm going to look at, they show me an example of how it will look on in the finished version, and then they give me the example HTML. Well, this one, email address, password, fine. That's more than I want. Let's keep going and see what other options we have. We can have an inline form. Well, that's an example of an inline form right here. It's all on one horizontal line. That's not what I want. Let's keep going. Horizontal form. This looks, as a matter of fact, this looks exactly like what I need. So we have a place for an email or a username. We have a place for a password. There's a checkbox, which I'll get rid of right now because I don't want it. And then there's a button to sign in. And here is all of the HTML I need. So I'm going to copy that. Then I'm going to switch back to my Atom editor, and I'm going to paste it in the middle column, the one that's 8 columns wide. Paste that, and then I'll format it a little so it looks a little bit better. So we'll just move this back over and save it. Now I'm not going to make any other changes right now. I'll leave that checkbox, which I'll get rid of in a minute, but let's just save that, switch back to my web browser, find my tab with my page, and reload it and see what it looks like. Well, that looks pretty good. Now obviously I want to put a heading or something at the top, but this is exactly what I want for a form. And you'll notice that it has a placeholder in this form. Everything's nicely arranged. Well, what happens if I shrink this down? If I make it smaller? Look at that. The headings jump over top of the text entry areas. This is exactly what I want. Okay, so let's go clean that up a little bit and maybe put a heading in there just for fun. So back to my editor I go, and I find where the form starts. And then before that, I'm going to say H1 log in. H1. Save. And then I think I'll just put an HR tag there. You haven't seen that one yet. That stands for horizontal rule. It's just a line. Well, I'll save that, go back, reload this page. That looks better. It's getting much better. And you notice how this is one thing that you have to know about Bootstrap is that any element that can will grow as far to the left and far to the right as it possibly can. Well, this is a text input, and notice how wide this is. It actually goes right to the edge of our middle column, our central content column. The same with password. Now that's okay, and we may want to at some point make this narrower, but I'm going to leave it like that for right now because it doesn't hurt anything at all. So here's our login form. Now there's one other thing I want to draw your attention to before we keep going, and that is we need to add a few more things to our default HTML file. So I'm going to go back to Bootstrap, and then I'm going to click back again, and then I'm going to go look at this page. So this says here is where are we? Let's go to Bootstrap, download Bootstrap, and the very bottom of this page gives us a basic template. And you'll notice that there are a couple of things here that we don't have, these meta tags. And there's a little comment here that tells me what they're for. The above 3 meta tags must come first in the head. Any other head content must come after these tags. Well, we already have that meta char set equals UTF-8, which tells the web browser how to encode the page. And what that does is allow us to display letters with accents and other unusual characters. But these two we don't have. So I'm going to copy those. Then I'm going to switch back to my, my editor, find the top part, and put those exactly where they belong. And there they are. Now let's think about what these actually do. This one, meta http equiv equals, and then some other stuff, that's almost exclusively for Microsoft's Internet Explorer browsers, and probably for their new Edge browser, which comes out today, actually, because I'm recording this on the day that Windows 10 launches. Internet Explorer has been the bane of web developers for years, and one of the things that this does is tell that browser how it should render the page, so it solves a lot of problems. Now, if you were to do a little bit of Googling and look for what should go in the HTTP equiv section of this tag, you'll see all kinds of suggestions. Ignore them. The only one you need right now is the one that we've pasted in here. This is the most recent version, and as of today, in July of 2015, this is the correct meta tag to use. The next one is one that's not immediately evident what it does. This tells the web browser how to render the content depending on the kind of device that we access it with. So we're using a computer, and it says for the viewport, that actually refers to the browser window and how big it is. The content of this should be the width of the device width, and the initial scale should be 1. In other words, don't zoom in. So let's save this, and when we go back and reload our web page, and I'll find a tab again and reload it, nothing will change. But those two tags have just made the page far more universally accessible. So we now have our login form. And what I want to do next is get rid of this remember me tag. So let's go back and have a little closer look at that form. So the form starts here, and we have div class equals form group. That is a Twitter Bootstrap class, and that tells the browser how to render everything between this div tag and its closing div tag. So this is a group of form elements called a form. Then we have an HTML tag you haven't seen yet called label. And label actually has, between the beginning label tag and the ending label tag, we have email. And if we go back and look at the form, that's referring to this right here. This is a label for some form element. Now let's look at some of the attributes for the opening label tag. The label is for input email 3. Well, if we go down a little bit, you'll see that we have an input, which we've already seen. That's where you can type stuff into a form. And the ID is input email 3. So this ID links this input with this label element. But input email 3 isn't great. I'm going to change that to username because it's much more readable. And over here, I'll call this username. And I'll leave this type to email alone. Now, this is exactly the same for all intents and purposes as an input of type equals text, which is what we used in our original login form. But email actually is an HTML5 version that only expects to get an input of type email. In other words, some characters followed by an @ sign, followed by some more characters. That's the format that it has to follow. It has a class of form control. That's another Twitter Bootstrap class. Now we're going to go a little bit further down and do the same thing for password. Well, the label for password, it says label for input password 3. I'm going to change that to simply password and find the matching ID and change that to password. And the rest of it looks pretty good. This checkbox, I don't want at all. So the checkbox is right here. So I'm going to delete that, save it, go back, and reload the page. And everything looks pretty good so far. But maybe I'll make this a little bit different. You notice that this text appears in the input areas. When I start typing, it goes away. But when I delete everything, it comes back. That's called a placeholder. Well, email is a good placeholder for email, but let's change it to something else just to see how it works. So we're on this line, input type equals email, class equals form control, ID equals username, placeholder equals email. If I change that to user@example.com, and spell example right, and save, and go back to my web browser and reload, Oh, that's a little more meaningful. That tells the user exactly what he or she should be entering, an email address. Password is fine. We can leave that alone. The only other thing I think I'll change is I'll put a line before the sign in button, and I'll change the color of the button to blue. Now you should remember how to do the line. We did it just a minute ago. HR tag, and I'll put a space before and after that just so it sets it apart a little bit. And the button type equals submit button default. Well, remember we used button primary last time. And if I reload that, that looks a little bit better. There's my login form.